So Tom, what is your story?
I'm Tom Bell. I was raised right here at the foot of the Wind Rivers. I wasn't born here. I was born in Winton, Wyoming, which was a coal mining camp where my dad worked at the time I was born. This old hotel sort of fits into their life, so it does mine. My dad was one of the very first Yellowstone Park bus drivers that would pick up people right there at the back door and take them to First Brooks Lake and then the next day over to Moran. Well, my mother had gone to work for the Amorettis when they had the EA ranch just above DuBois. But when they got the Brooks Lake Lodge set up, she was sent up there as a waitress. So she and these other young ladies would meet the bus drivers, and my dad was one of them. But at any rate, my dad was also a coal miner. That is, he'd gone into the coal mines when he was just 14 years old, just got out of the 8th grade. So he never got beyond the 8th grade, but he'd worked all his life. But they met there, and then Dad got a job. The bus driving was just in the summertime. In the wintertime, he worked in the coal mines. And so he got a job at Winton, and that's where I was born. Then when I was 2 years old, or 3, they bought the ranch out on North Fork. So I was raised a ranch kid. I had to think about this. What's my backstory? And I thought, you know, I am an old 87-year-old kid who fell in love with this big, beautiful planet Earth at a young age, and I never got over it. So all of my life's work has been oriented toward just trying to keep what you can of the beauty and the good things of this planet. And that's what's kind of absorbed all of my life. I took time out, of course, to teach for 13 years, and I worked for the Game and Fish for 5 years, but then I just kind of freelance, and that's when I started the Wyoming Outdoor Council and High Country News. All through my life, I've been writing and talking. And so when I was asked by High Country News or somebody who was having a program around High Country News, they call it Headwaters, and it's at Gunnison State College. I was asked to give some remarks there, and I'll just refer to that. When I was in service and we were sent overseas, we went first to Djida, Tunisia, North Africa. Well, Tunis is very close to the old city-state of Carthage. In one of our training trips, we flew right over where Carthage had once been. All that's left of it is a few white pillars of marble laying in the sand. And I knew just enough about it that it kind of amazed me, but it really stuck with me. Within about 2 years, I'd been hit, and I got back to the States and started college, and one of my professors, well, I was in wildlife conservation and game management, and old Dr. John Scott tried to put all of us into perspective as to what had happened down through history. And one of the things that he talked about was Carthage. Here it had been this great, big, beautiful city-state. It was one of these cities of the Mediterranean area where, of course, civilization arose and grew. And Carthage was, it was located in an area at that time which was very productive and very rich. It became the breadbasket for the Roman Empire after Rome took over. Here I'd flown over it, and there was nothing but white pillars lying in the white sand. And I thought, oh boy. Well, Dr. Scott told us why. But I started out talking about that down at Gunnison, at the Gunnison State College, and I said I was citing it as an example of what can happen any place on earth if man loses his humility and his appreciation of this spaceship we call Earth and all its ecosystems. And we are a part and parcel of one of those ecosystems wherever we might live, whether it's in Atlanta, Wyoming, or Gunnison, Colorado, or Tunisia now. And when we threaten the viability of our own ecosystem, we are imperiling our own long-term survival. And that's where we find ourselves today. I think we need to keep in mind and in context that whatever actions we take today in relation to our air, our water, and our land, there are going to be consequences. It doesn't matter if it's drilling for oil and gas in New Mexico or Wyoming or Alaska. It doesn't matter if it's overgrazing in China, Arizona, Colorado, or Montana. It doesn't matter if egregious clear-cutting of timber is taking place in the Amazon jungle, in Indonesia, in Oregon, or British Columbia. We are destroying ecosystems. We human beings are having a serious impact on and taking a tremendous toll of our natural capital, our natural resources, which cannot be sustained. The latest World Watch magazine has an article which says human consumption may already be drawing down resources 20% faster than the earth can renew them. But let me point out that High Country News was founded upon the principles and the philosophy which I have just expounded. I looked down upon Carthage in January 1944. I started High Country News in January 1970, a short 26 years later. And I was 45 years old. At that tender age, idealistic, but not very realistic. All kinds of folks said I couldn't succeed, but I was driven by a passion that we human beings could do better by ourselves and our posterity, and I wanted to write about it, so I created my own forum. And that's how High Country News came in. Then I go on. In all my writing, you will find a common thread running through many of those columns in which I grieve for our planet Earth and what we're doing to it. I grieve for our posterity and the tragedies which would be visited upon them. And finally, I came down to the wonderful saying by Jesus, paraphrased here, "Forgive us, Father, for we know not what we do." And so that's kind of been the thing that's driven me all this time. It still does. You know, I look around out there, I see those young folks walking, and they don't have a clue as to what's happening to them right now, and will happen to them with even greater consequences within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. It's that close, Shelli. It's very bad. I get stuff from World Watch Institute, and I just stuck this in, and their newsletter said, growth in population and consumption are the twin drivers of environmental unsustainability. We cannot sustain what we've been doing and what we're still doing. And yet you can't convince people, especially like the Republicans in Congress. I mean, they'd like to turn the clock back at least 40 to 50 years to when I first started, when we didn't have any environmental laws, didn't have any. So we started fighting for them then, for clean air, protect our clean water, protect our lands, watch our forests, and so on. And now they want to throw the EPA out, want to just do away with it. We don't need it, they say. They should have been here 40 years ago, you know. That was at a time when Governor Millward Simpson was governor, and he was watching things, and somebody had been, well, it wasn't more than somebody, it was businesses and lots of folks around Casper were telling him, we need to clean up the Platte River. It's bad. Well, Millward is a very wise, great governor. He went up and looked at the situation, and then he told the oil companies and the corporations, you can't do that. You've got to clean up that river. Within a few years, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio caught fire and caused tremendous damage from the fire spreading to the buildings along the banks. That's what can happen. And that's what did happen. Well, Millward Simpson, in his wisdom, said, you can't do that, you gotta clean it up. And now, of course, industry is saying, oh, those regulations, the regulations are killing us. Like hell they are. If you don't have regulations, you will kill us. You know, and that's some of the substance of it. Well, anyway, some other things that I thought I'd point out. I wrote this when I went to work for Roger Budrow. He's the one that taught me all I knew about journalism. And I went to work for him, and he said, you know, Tom, I want you to write a column. He was great on the columns, you know. So I said, okay, never done it, but I'm game. I'd been writing these stories for Wyoming Wildlife, you know, kids' stories and that sort of thing. So anyway, I quit at Ocean Lake and went to work for Roger. That was when I started doing this, writing a column. And the first column came out on December 3rd, 1959. And anyway, I go on writing about my background then. I write from the perspective of a native-born, locally grown Wyomingite. My great-grandparents settled at Milford in 1878. For the better part of 70 years, I've lived in Fremont County. This perspective takes in the growing up experience of a ranch boy whose formative years were spent during the Great Depression and the searing drought of the 1930s. It was a terrible time for my folks, as it was for most poor working families. But I go on, my outlook on life is leavened by education, from a one-room country school on Upper North Fork and at Hudson Coal Mine No. 2 to the old Fremont County Vocational High School. Then it was college to 2.5 years in military service, and then back to college at the University of Wyoming. The degrees came as a bachelor's in wildlife conservation and game management and a master's degree in zoology and ecology. I have never lost my love of and respect for science. That's one of the things that just gripes me no end. That those Republicans sitting back there in Congress do not believe in the science of climate change. And it's killing us. It's killing the world. But they are in a position to just stop the works. It's a crime. It's criminal. If there is a hereafter and somebody's looking for justice, those people will just be ground up. It's terrible. I have never lost my love of and respect for science. Scientific evidence obtained and analyzed by trained men and women will always eventually prevail over the darkness of ignorance, paranoia, political correctness, and unfounded rumors and allegations. The truth will always out. And it will, but the problem is, with what's facing us right now with climate change, is happening so fast that we are being bypassed. If the good Lord's hand is on this, he's just saying, well, you dumb critters, if you don't believe me and if you don't want to see what's going on, you'll suffer the consequences. And that's the hell of it all. You know, my grandkids and great-grandkids, they will suffer something terrible, I think. I brought a deal that I took off the internet Well, here it is. Coming to the theater near you, the greatest water crisis in the history of civilization. It'll get so hot and the weather will have changed so much that this story is about the western part of the United States and especially the Southwest. And he points out of the Indian tribes that lived there, that when the white man got there, there was nothing left but a few remains of where they lived. Now, what happened to them? They know what happened to them. It was a terrible drought that killed them all. Well, not all, because they think there's remnants of those people amongst some of the Indian tribes. But they're pointing out that California and Arizona, New Mexico, down through there, they use so much of our water that comes from right up here. I mean, it drains off the other side, and they get it down there, which means that we are going to be affected here now. We've had a couple of good years, nice snow, beautiful and white up there now. But how much longer is it going to last? According to the experts and the modeling they're doing, they think that by 2030, 19 years from now, they will be in terrible drought. Look at Texas now. Texas, and I think he cites it here, Texas is in one of the worst droughts they've ever had, not since the great dust storms of the 30s. Oklahoma and Texas are just dry, and that's what they foresee from here on out. Now they're getting a little rain and snow down there now, and they're just delighting in it, but it's going to continue. So that's just one of the things. And South Africa is being caught up in these droughts. We don't really hear about it, and that's one of the other things that is so sad about what's going on. Our big media papers, New York Times, Washington Post, all those others, although the New York Times has been pretty good about putting out information. But for instance, Russia had a series of terrible fires, heat and fires. I've forgotten how many thousand people died just from the heat, but they'd never seen anything like it. And I've forgotten what his title is, Medvedev of Russia, said they are going to have to do something to try to mitigate it, because they had never in their history seen what happened. It got so hot and so dry that they lost much of their wheat crop. And Russia is one of the big wheat producers in the whole world. So, you know, outside a little bit here, there, so on, our media didn't say a thing about it. That's the other thing about it. People are not alerted to what's going on and what's so bad. So anyway, but that's just one of the consequences, and it'll happen here. And of course, when you lose your water, you lose your food. Just like Russia with that. China, at the same time that this was happening in Russia, China, who produces tremendous amounts of wheat and rice, they were dry and they were hot. And so they lost a lot of their crop. Well, I know that when you ladies go to the grocery, you kind of keep track of what's going on with prices. And when one of these great big deals happens, you may notice that the cornflakes have gone up about 10, 15, 20 cents a box or whatever. It's all figured out with percentages and so on. But all of those things adding up will have an effect on each and every one of us in this earth. Now these rich people, the billionaires and the multimillionaires, they think they can escape it. They can't. They're talking about some of these places in here, the temperature in the summertime getting to be an average of 110 to 130 degrees. You know how you feel when it hits to about 100 to 105 here. Boy, I used to think about the stories coming out of Iraq about the poor soldiers having to work and fight in 110 and 115 degrees and carry those heavy packs and never knowing when a bullet's coming your way. That must have been pure hell. But that's what's going to happen. The rich guys think, oh, well, I can build my house so that it will be impervious to heat. No, you can't. There's no way. Some of the scientists are pointing out that these Republicans in Congress and some of the other people who don't believe in climate change, they say, well, those people will begin to believe when the chemistry and the physics turn right. When it's turned up to 120 degrees, inside and outside your house, no matter what you think you're doing. Now, they think they can probably just pull more electricity off the line. No, because there won't be any electricity. That will have gone. So we're just caught up in a series of circumstances that I think is going to be deadly. And I'm sorry. Well, anyway, I go on. Even as a boy and through my youth, I was a student and keen observer of the natural world around me. It fascinated me and led to my decision to be a trained scientist. As a country boy, I was naive about politics and the subtle ways of the world. It took some 6 years of my life to gain the scientific training I wanted. It took only about the same amount of time to experience the politics and the disillusionment which ended my career as a biologist. And you see, that's the thing now, the politics. This old James Inhofe of Oklahoma. I hope he cooks in his own juices. Don't wish anything bad on him. But he will probably live to see it get to 120, 130 degrees in Oklahoma. Then we'll see what he thinks. It's just too bad